So I want to kind of keep this a little bit high level and think about ways in which the LiDAR is driving a few different things. We're using it in site planning, using it in, critical issues analysis as for sites, for those preparing for industry. So I'm going to kind of use some slides thinking about LiDAR and geophysics, since some of the considerations that are complementary and thinking well about how to use these technologies and in your projects, whether it's specific resource identification or site planning, being mindful to critical issues with sites with or for cultural resources and historic resources. So there's that. And then for some examples, I pulled up some data that I had built a DTM for a digital terrain model for a cemetery and a historic ghost town we found in East Texas. So good morning, everybody. So to kind of start off, pull up my screen shares here. Let's just do this. This is easier. I have flamingos as my screensaver today. Great. All right. So I have this pretty picture. Let's talk about LiDAR a little bit. So LiDAR is, light detection and ranging. The rather than talk about some of the specific things, let me do not disturb my teams real quick. Everyone's freaking out since the White House has terminated a lot of federal contracts yesterday. So there we are. Apologies, guys. I'm like split between 3 time zones for the past 48 hours, so I'm a little confused as to what time it is. So with LiDAR, rather than focus on some of the specific data collection, because there's a lot of people who are trained to specifically kind of do that when there are existing data that we can incorporate already, as long as we know what we're working with and are thinking about some of the resolutions and a lot of different kinds of parameters for this. So for light detection and ranging, where a lot of this is coming from, they're coming from multiple sources. They're coming from people like you see on TV. Collecting, unmanned aerial survey data using a LiDAR scanner in the bottom of their drones. And so, those people are flying around. They typically have if they're doing it in the US, an FAA 107 license where they've gone through the flight training and are trained to fly that kind of stuff. And not only that, but also go in, collect and process that data. So this is typically where you see some of the things such as photogrammetry being incorporated off of drones and then LiDAR, but those aren't a one-to-one. That's not even the same technology to collect this data. Other ways you're seeing this data is in public data sources, NOAA and the USGS being some of the bigger ones where they're collecting it on a regional level, either for departments of transportations, for coastal monitoring, for wells and oil exploration, and other forms of environmental monitoring and assessment. So when they're collecting that data, it can either be done via airplane where they have the technology collecting the data, scanners on the bottom of their planes, or it can be done via satellite. And onto the satellite end of this, you have groups such as Global Explorer, which formed out of a TED prize that Sarah Parkak had won, doing some of this kind of satellite remote sensing work internationally at a few different areas. And then on a more kind of local level, you see other ways in which this is being incorporated, particularly a lot in the coastal areas here in the Southeast for probability modeling and so on and so forth in the academic realm. Now, I'm not an academic. I'm speaking purely from an industry perspective. So there's a lot of different ways in which people can slice and dice this. And there's a lot of really cool ways in which people are adapting and altering existing technologies and data sources to continue to create really cool products that can help with site planning and resource assessment and a whole 9 yards. So to think about some of the main concerns that you have, even beyond LiDAR and thinking more in remote sensing, geophysical techniques, which to some degree, this does kind of fold into that. You need to think about a few different parameters. So for LiDAR, one of the biggest ones is going to be resolution. What is the resolution of the data you're collecting? Is it a meter by meter blocks? Is it, 5 meters by 5 meters? Is it 10 meters by 10 meters? Over time, over the past 25 years, especially as certain military data that had collected some of these data sources have improved in resolution. They're becoming accessible to the general public, so they can pull some of these kinds of things. So it wouldn't be uncommon for you to be scrolling around on Facebook, for example, and there's the various interest groups where people are taking screenshots off of apps, and those apps are drawing from like LiDAR that's integrated and averaged between, a few different kinds of public data sources in the US, right? So one of the biggest things is going to be resolution. One of the other, some of the other things, and we'll talk about some of the geophysical kinds of concerns, since some of these considerations do apply, going to be, whether or not there's known features at known depths, and less so the known features at known depths when you're dealing with LiDAR, more so at the surface. Are there known superficial features that, are significant? Because you don't want to misinterpret your site. Say you're using this LiDAR for, looking for pre-contact mounds in the US Southeast, and you have random pimple mounds throughout the area. Well, one's cultural, one's natural, most of the time. Sometimes, that's not always a one-to-one comparison. So those are some of those kinds of geological considerations that you might want to think about. And that goes into point 3 here on this slide. Now moving beyond that into like more of the remote sensing realm, you don't want to misinterpret utility lines as being a contributing feature to an archaeological site, unless that archaeological site is, some historic utilities, which, that we can get into that later. Now, to the second point, would pre-existing utilities or infrastructure impede data collection? Now, I should probably mention that these slides were developed for speaking at a gas and FERC permitting conference. So, that was kind of the angle here. But some of these things are still relevant to how we're working with cultural resources on a broader scale, because a lot of sites are in a lot of, somewhat populated areas. So there's power lines, there's, fiber optic, there's a lot of different kinds of things that you might want to take into consideration when it comes to some of the planning of what you're looking for. So, when you're starting with your research question, you're asking, hey, I'm looking for a cemetery. Okay, if you're looking for a cemetery, understanding if there's existing utilities is good. Some of those, to some degree, you can use this for calibrating certain equipment, right? Because if you have known features at known depths, you can be expecting to find that in vertical data collection rather than horizontal, and in horizontal data collection. But then again, back to point 3 here, shallow geological conditions affecting the ability to identify archaeological features. So, this isn't just specifically a local site geology, but this kind of melts into local geomorphology and physiography. I spoke about, giving an example in Texas. And in Texas, we have a variety of required kind of deep chesting strategies, geoarchaeological strategies that are required for, Section 106 compliance. So federal archaeological compliance, when, typically associated with permitting or other funding obligations. So, we have to consider those effects, but thinking, physiography and geomorphology writ large, some of the Pleistocene and Holocene deposits can be sitting right next to each other. So you kind of have some differing geological environments that you might want to take into consideration that are significant to site interpretation. So with that being said, we're going to ignore this and move on to some actual data and look at some projects. Make sure I didn't have any other things in here. Well, one last thing, to kind of talk about before we start talking into some site-specific examples are where are some ways in which these technologies can be implemented, right? So to some degree, for folks who are looking to utilize this in Section 106 compliance, it's not uncommon to be asked for desktops or feed studies or fatal flaw studies for projects. And these LiDAR are publicly available and often don't cost that much more to incorporate if you are depending on the scale of your projects. Um, Now, with integrating that data with other historic aerials, historic maps, especially as the, increasing accessibility of those historic resources is out there, through whether it be through the USGS, the National Archives, the Bureau of Land Management, Government Land Office, and so on. There's a lot of different ways in which these can be compiled and put together and utilized. So, two studies that kind of stick out as something worth mentioning here, from our own Lindsay Cochran here in the group. Lindsay and her co-author Nick Honerkamp put together an article reconciling historic maps on Georgia's coast, and some of the things that Lindsay put and Nick put in this article that stood out as something that we need to think at a different level about is, what was the map maker's intent? What is the intent of what those maps are showing? Because they're gonna place emphasis on different things, which will have varying levels of I guess maybe the word is spatial integrity, where the houses may not necessarily always be plotted in the same place, or if you're copying the same maps from years to years, they're not really going to focus on relocating the same house if the intent isn't showing where the houses are, but rather where the coastline is. And then another study that kind of comes to mind is another recent study on the Georgia coast from Amanda Roberts Thompson's, which is utilizing historic LiDAR and actually um, classifying these features that are visible to LiDAR, but not necessarily visible on the surface all the time. And classifying those features helped better kind of reconstruct what the historic plantation landscape looked like, but also complemented into a follow-up presentation in 2023 in Lisbon, where we had a session called Ports of Call, and uh, Amanda Thompson had aimed to reconstruct kind of the pathways of mobility for the enslaved folks, and a lot of that was driven from some of the longer term kind of broader scale landscape and a LiDAR analysis. So now shifting gears, let's see if ArcGIS is going to crash today. What does this data look like? So
Oh,
when
Steve, I just
yeah,
had a quick question. Sorry to break your stride.
no, for sure.
What are the feed projects that were on your previous slide?
Yeah, so these are basically these are topics where terms we're using in industry. Feed and then fatal flaw. These are basically feasibility studies that are being used for pipeline and other natural gas facilities. Um, it's a term I typically see more so now in like FERC, or so Federal Energy Regulatory Commission permitting, rather than uh, you know is spread across the thing. So the more broadly, those are essentially critical issues analysis for the purpose of our work. Cultural resources. It's basically a critical issues analysis, or in some states they call it a desktop analysis, and some states they require calling it a phase or class one inventory and stuff. So that's typically what it is. It's a scale of a project, if that makes sense. So in getting some of these data, so utilizing, for the purposes of our presentation here and in working on another project, something I had pulled for talking today was some data from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. So NOAA curates a pretty large database of high resolution LiDAR data on top of land cover and other data sources that are pertinent to a range of different kinds of concerns. So for here, I pulled some LiDAR data here in East Texas for projects that have been worked on or are being revisited, or just general areas here. So in this first area, I will keep the location's name out of it, but where we are is essentially in the Neches River Basin. And what we're looking at here is a very messed up side of an old lumber mill. The lumber mill is still standing, but one of the things that I wanted to kind of show here was resolution, and also there's a cemetery here on this property. So in requesting some of these data from NOAA, they send it's automatically georeferenced. You don't have to go georeferencing, as long as you're making sure you're using the right projections in GIS. These can be taken and incorporated and then overlaid with existing kind of, where's my pane? Oh my goodness. That's not the one I need. Contents. This can be overlaid with reference layers, so you can kind of see where how certain things are lining up. So we have a lot of existing railroad infrastructure on this property, and you see where some of the roads are existing on this property. But one of the things I wanted to kind of point out here too is that in the way that this data was collected, um, you see that a lot of the houses nearby are kind of whited out. So there's just no data here whatsoever. And one of the utilities in using some of these data is you're able to kind of manipulate, let's see, leave it as this layer. You're able to manipulate some of the ways in which this is viewed, which may help, depending on what you're looking for, may help in what you're ultimately looking for here. And this one is going to be problematic. I already know it. I've had some horrible issues with GIS past few days. So live demonstration probably wasn't the way to go. But nonetheless, we'll make it work. So here, thinking about what does LiDAR over a cemetery look like? And if we think about the geology, we can compare some parts of the East Texas to Florida. Florida has, in many areas, in the coastal areas, it has younger landforms. It's sandier soils. It's siltier soils than compared to some of the uh, 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 surface geology in eastern Texas, which a lot of it is, Quaternary age or Cretaceous age soils, and a lot of them have pretty thick clay deposits, or they have more of a silty kind of clay soil matrix in some areas. Now, obviously, it varies pretty widely on a local and a county and a regional level. But what we've zoomed into here is actually a cemetery. So this is kind of an area where LiDAR isn't the most helpful thing in the world if you don't understand the scale of what you're looking at here. So the cemetery here, interestingly enough, to give a little bit of history, in the way in which the plat, like the survey, the property lines have been drawn, the cemetery only includes a section this big. Um, oh, Sarah, apologies. Can you guys see the box I drew?
Yes, I can see a dotted line box
Awesome.
with
Yeah,
your
so this
cursor.
Yes. So the cemetery, the way in which the property lines were drawn, only includes this area. However, the cemetery has historically always been this whole area right here. So there's an entire section that has been kind of completely wiped out. So with this cemetery, it's a segregated cemetery. So, and I think to a certain degree that is very clearly playing out here spatially and how the cemetery is being managed. So in this cemetery, all of the head markers are still very visible here. And you can see, they're not super discernible and tied to a specific, grave or anything like that in this area. You can see the nice linear rows running north to south where a lot of headstone and mounded up areas are, whereas the graves all line up east to west here. So some features here, while not specifically traced without doing a field visit, we can take a look and make some inferences. But after having conducted a field visit, we know what these tie to. In moving down here, this became a particular area of concern because there's no headstones visible. And so trying to determine the number of graves became quite difficult because you can see what's being kind of preserved in the LiDAR is that this area right here is kind of an unmanaged bit of grass and some various fill dirt that seems to have been there for a pretty long time based off of some silterized glass that was just kind of on top or around the base of a tree over here in this area. But this area seems to be where the cemetery actually extends out to. And the LiDAR isn't really the most useful in discerning the grave's location. So this became a bit of a bust in this area, but became a bit of a bust largely due to the local geology. This is a pretty rocky area. This is a pretty shallow bedrock, and the soils here aren't really the most conducive for looking for the types of features that we were really looking for. Now, on the flip side, let me pause and go to the next area, show you guys where it was really successful. I guess something, here we go. Come on, load up. There we go. There we go. Here we go. And looking at an area where this was very successful, we came in finding this ghost town. So today, all of this is a planted pine forest. However, if you look at LiDAR that was collected in 2021, something that really pops out here is you still see remnants of a linear street grid, pretty far stretching into the woods over here. And upon digging over in this area, we were able to actually further kind of trace out where these deposits were, finding brick piers, but not only brick piers, finding portions of the mill that were part of the mill town, because this was a lumber town that only existed for about 50 years. And you can still see where there's still remnants and this basically kind of scars on the earth for where rail beds were for raised subgrade, and where the mill was, and where some of the yards were and cooling guards. So you're seeing basically the entire every required component to a successful milling operation just completely scarred onto the earth at a pretty large scale, extending out even to where their town is still visible on LiDAR, whereas it doesn't exist if you look at it today. So it's fine. Our imagery layer. And this is what it looks like today. So for the purposes of site planning, this helps make a few different kinds of inferences. This helps in making some planning decisions about how we may want to excavate the site and preserve the site, but also it gives us a very strong indication of what the extent of the site is, if project boundaries are to ever change. Now, the way this kind of translates further down into this area is the contiguous part of the town here, and incorporating other maps. This is a very faint area, but this is where a smaller segregated neighborhood of workers had lived that were related to the mill here. And so not only do you have the components of this and where the school should have been, now these aren't definitive and speak out that this was all based off of artifactual analysis and other excavation analysis. We still have a remnant subgrade of a switchover in the property. So there's a track connecting these two different historic railroads. Well, this railroad doesn't exist anymore, but the road basically follows the original subgrade. And you can still see that this is kind of scarred onto the earth as well, which helps in kind of understanding. Oh, goodness, where did it go? Apologies, I want to turn that layer off. Just not sure which is which. There we go. Helps in kind of understanding how they kind of organize the site over time. So in comparing that with existing historic maps and other features, we're kind of rebuild a bit of this landscape. And rather than, I mean, when everyone sees LiDAR, they're typically seeing these pretty fantastical, Mayan towns and massive infrastructure. I mean, these are the more to many who don't work in cultural resources, these can be a bit more of the unassuming and uninteresting things. And so, you get the question of, well, why is that historic? Well, these are significant historic trends in cultural development in the U.S. And the fact that have elements that we where we know the town is segregated historically, we know that writ large across the Southeast that segregation played out spatially. We can begin to make some inferences to not only rebuild the physical landscape, but start to try to foreground what the social landscape may end up looking like, as research continues in certain ways. So, uh, like I said, keeping this high level, these are where I kind of wanted to start our conversation today, and then continue with some questions, conversations about ways in which this is maybe applied, has applied, and so on and so forth. So, thank you guys for letting me ramble on for a few minutes.
Thank you, Steve.
Problem.
This is a big ask, but are you able to show like how you might look for some of those Florida cemeteries I sent you?
Yeah, I put in the data request this morning, so I'm waiting for
Oh,
the. Sometimes it'll take an hour, depending on how big of an area, and I got a pretty big swath for you guys, so I should have that not by now. I think the government has some concerns about how fast they can respond to things right now.
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, it's been an interesting 24 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to go from the known to the unknown and trying to find kind of that, signature of what things look like. Do you find, because you do work a lot in the Southeast, that Texas patterns are different than Florida, are different than Louisiana?
Yeah, it's interesting. You have to think about it in terms of trends in historical development. I mean, when we start thinking about like industry, lumber industry, and some of those things that kind of really took off here in more rural and at the time poorer parts of the Southeast, the uh, cultural landscape surrounding the rise in timber development is really a regional on a different scale than what we may see when it comes to like looking for sites associated with different forms of plantation agricultural, right? I'm from southern Louisiana. I live in southern Louisiana. And, one of the biggest things that we have, down here is sugarcane fields. And sugarcane fields are completely laid out differently, require different forms of landscape modification that then rice fields. But then also, if you think about rice fields and rice agriculture at plantation scale, how it transforms in this region is going to look very different than over the Carolinas because of a complete different kind of a coastal physiography. So you really have to be able to kind of ground that in knowledge of local and historical patterns of development. And obviously, to some degree, those can be a bit reductive, right? But this isn't supposed to be the end all be all of site interpretation, right? It's supposed to be a part of a wider range of complementary tools that we may use to really really drive forward different forms of preservation, right? So I'm thinking, from my perspective, I'm not an academic researcher. I focus more towards um, compliance, right, and policy. That's where I spend a lot of my time doing. But not obviously, I'm not dealing with policy at the same scale like Marcy is, right? So it's a different it's a different set of kind of concerns. So like the lens that I'm looking for is going to probably differ from quite a quite a lot of people than than uh, probably a little bit closer to yours, Sarah, with the cemetery interest, but it might be different than say Lindsay. Um, sorry, Lindsay, I had to throw you under the bus. um, yeah,
She's gonna be driving the bus in just a minute.
yeah, shoot, yes.
Are there any uh like public access or free to use resources that someone getting started with this, i.e.,
Yeah,
can kind of look at or just start to get those LiDAR muscles building up?
I'm gonna throw a link in the chat for folks. Actually, I can share my screen. So one of my favorite favorite resources. Let me see here. I gotta close ArcGIS before my computer like just completely freaks out. All right. What's going on here? There we go. One of my favorite resources is the NOAA Data Access Viewer. And so you have three options. You have imagery, land cover, elevation. So
Well, could
say,
you stick that URL in the chat?
absolutely.
I'm a kinesthetic learner, so I do best by doing.
That's how I am too. So let's say I want to grab some data close to home, right? I'm gonna draw my box. This is our area, and it's going to show you how these different data sources overlap. It'll show you the year. There's topography D, and there's a lot of cool stuff in New Orleans. You would think I would know what's in my own town. Um, let's go to an area I'm not sure what's out there in terms of data resources. So Montague. So I'll pick Montague. You know, this was these two towns were talked about a lot when we had Hurricane Helene last September because the cemeteries flooded several feet underwater, and it led to some interesting preservation discussions that needed to be had. But so you can kind of see where different areas are overlapping within the area you have selected and kind of make some decisions about what might be an appropriate data source there. So let's go look over in the first coast area. Say, looking for something right here in the estuaries. So we can kind of get a good sense. Okay, well, this 2024 post Milton LiDAR is going to be really only on the A1A. Same with 2022. I'm sensing a trend here. Okay, so we have compiled 2018 to 2020. And click on that and it'll give you some good
How do you get that sidebar up?
oh, you just draw your box.
How do I draw a box?
You see
Oh,
where it says
draw.
yeah, draw up in the top. So when you click on the source, when you've identified like a source that you want to use, you can just say, let's go with the A1A stuff, right? So when you click on that, it will tell you who made the data, what the data source is, what the vertical accuracy is. So that's good. You have a good idea what the root mean squared error is, point spacing in meters. I mean, this is a lot of really good kind of metadata so you can understand any kind of resolution you may get here. So you can just draw your boundary, add the card. It's just going to stick to what's in your boundary here. So if you think you're going to get this whole thing, you can just click the bulk download. But wherever you draw your boundary, if you find a source you want, you just click add to cart and then you go in, give it your info real quick. This is all free stuff. So you can look at your different projection options, the zones, depending on the projections, your datums, what kind of units you're looking for, what the output is, whether it's going to be a grid geotiff or raster or, you know, contour, visual representation, and so on and so forth. So you have a lot of control over of what you're doing, but even going off of some of the standard, you can get some really, really nice data. So that is one way I would start for finding data. Now, interpreting that data, um, there's a lot of really good random articles and archaeological spatial analysis literature. I'm not going to throw some into the chat for folks. There's one that I like to use, but it's a bit pricey, but I got it a while ago when it wasn't a bit pricey. But there's variations of this that are useful for this kind of work.
How safe is this data, knowing that it's housed at NOAA right now? Should we all be downloading pages and pages?
I've been wondering the same thing. You know, it's really interesting. The environmental justice screen app went down last or a week or two ago. So EJ screen's completely down. So like for any NEPA planning that's requiring using or consulting EJ screen, so like, you know, the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service requires using EJ screen and doing any kind of CPA 52 planning documents, which are not, they're cultural resources included, but not a cultural resource thing. EJ screen's completely gone, so it's been down since January 20th. So can't really do much. So I don't know. I will probably say that we probably won't see any additional data being collected in the next few years, but who's to say? It is just completely unknown what's going on right now.
Hey, Steve and Sarah, I just
Man,
wanted to report that this is Anne, and I do work in the Arctic. So the IARPC website is no longer available,
oh
which
man,
is a federally funded, federal agencies. It's an integrated network, and they do we have working groups from all kinds of topics, and it's been going on for years, and it's down. So I just wrote to one of the coordinators to ask her, because I was trying to find 2 webinars on tsunamis and something else I wanted to watch this week. And they do have the YouTube channel and it's still live. So I asked her, are you going to be able to post this? Are you working? Are you going to be able to post these videos?
yeah.
So yeah, it's crazy. And by the way, it worries me when you say that because I work on an NSF grant. Does everybody know what all the PIs were sent on NSF grants?
You could mention it for make sure we're all on the same page.
No use of federal funds, even if allocated. We have a federal court order for temporary restraining for 30 days. So I am sending in receipts like crazy
Yeah, the TRO
because,
didn't help us at all. I had the contract completely terminated yesterday. That was like a nationwide several $1 million contract that's just completely kaput now because the USDA doesn't have the staff, but they weren't allowed to build an IRA. So, and a lot of that stuff was under the IRA funds that they were billing to.
yeah. So since I do emergency management work, I do the hazard and risk stuff for that North Slope borough. I'm the only one doing it along with partners. So I'm trying to find out what this means for the local policies, we have a DEIA required, right? We're required for an NSF grant. So what does that mean? Does that mean if we have that, we can no longer get funded? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, good we're all meeting today so we can be data heroes and start to work and share with each other. And Lindsay, do you want to share about the Wayback Machine? Because Mike Toman mentioned this last week, and I had heard of it before, but when he mentioned it, I thought he was kind of joking. And then it's real. It's real.
Yeah, it's
Maybe.
definitely a real thing. So there's the Wayback Machine, which is an archive of the internet. And the idea of Wayback Machine is like, haha, you can look at any website from whatever period of time. So you can look at Amazon from 2007. But what people are using it for now is to be able to go back to some of those earlier kind of times of the internet. So I put in the post, there's something called Archive Team Warrior, which you can develop through Oracle. It helps with Wayback Machine and internet.org, or I think it's archive.org or archive.io. So what you can do, I'm happy to send you stuff. I'm not personally doing it, but you can essentially allocate part of your GPU to download different government websites to create a mirror that could be sustainable and then circulated probably through GitHub is what I suspect. So that's one way to do things. And you can just say, I have this much space. You guys can use this to download whatever you need. It could be IRS, it could be NOAA, it could be the Earth Explorer stuff, whatever. Another thing that you can do is, hold on, so archive.org for Wayback Machine. And then you can go to, I'll put this in here, web.archive.org collection search. And there's a group of people that will download basically the internet at every change of term. So you can get like the climate websites from end of term 2020 or 2024. So I haven't explored too much of that as far as the like perpetuation of large scale data sets, but I think that is probably going to be a good option. So there are people that are very active in downloading those data sets. And I think that we're ultimately just going to be sending each other stuff on like g.tt or GitHub. There's going to be a ton of repositories, in particular GitHub, and then just sending, you know, I'll send people just flash drives. So I think that that's going to be a huge data sharing system now. So ultimately, Wayback Machine through archive.org. And then if you all want to go on, oh man, I forget what the website is right now, but it's basically where you can get articles and books for free that people have just uploaded. You have to use a VPN. Do y'all know what that's called?
Yeah, it's Sci-Hub.
Yes, I have. That's what it is.
Yeah, Elizabeth put it in the chat.
Yeah. It's not technically legal, I don't think. But yeah. So anyways, hope those help. And I think VPNs are going to be pretty necessary if you're diving into any of this stuff. I need to get one, but Proton has a pretty good VPN. So it basically reroutes your IP address. So it might seem like you're in Norway one day or Brazil in the other or something. So it can help protect your internet safety.
Oh, Andrew, do you want to explain your note?
Sure. For those who don't want to go down the expensive route of ArcPro, you can use QGIS. It's an open source GIS. It's very similar to what ArcMap used to be, so the predecessor to ArcPro. It has a free toolbar that you can use to integrate LiDAR. It doesn't work in ArcPro. It's because of ArcPro has their own stuff, but it's a great tool. It takes a little bit to use. I set the links for it. It shows you how to do it, but essentially you can manipulate the shades and shadows within your LiDAR data, and it'll produce some amazing maps. And we use it all the time to find like pit features that Native Americans would use for to quarries, and very small pits that are 1 or 2 meters in size that we can just pull from the LiDAR data.
We're about to get my obligatory North Dakota topography joke in there, but thank you for giving some really quality example.
Yeah, and there are some other sites like the state of North Dakota and Minnesota. The Departments of Water Resources host all of their LiDAR data. So some of the states up here in the Northern Plains have the entire states are completely covered in LiDAR. So you can just go on their websites and look at everything and all the LiDAR data. So you don't actually have to interpret any of the data. It's pretty sweet. Yay, oil money.
Yeah, we have the same thing in Louisiana and Texas.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to mention there is, for those, I don't know many people doing Arctic research that's in our group, but there is the Arctic Data Center, which unfortunately it was funded by NSF, and all of us are now required. It's required that we submit all of our data, and whether it's social science or whatever. I don't know what that means for the future, but it is an NSF required depository or public repository. Yeah. But they also have like a whole page, which is really cool, on sensitivity data. I recommend going to see that because a lot of the data could be proprietary or sensitive, depending on the locality, but they regulate all of that. They have a great system for that.
So I requested and got the data for LiDAR for Nassau County. And what do you do with it when you get it?
Well, plug it into QGIS or ArcGIS, whichever you're using. So I want to pull Cassie in to help you with that, but it should be automatically geo-referenced when you're in there. Are you able to open it on ArcGIS? We can look at it all together.
I'm gonna send it to you. Will that
Okay.
work?
We'll make it work.
That way you can drive it. I just have to make sure I get your right.
Yeah, please don't send this to my old work email.
What's the new one?
TRC. It's not even new anymore. I've been here for a while.
I know. I just
It's okay.
all right, I sent it to you. It's not that big. It's 1.175 megabytes. I was afraid. I thought it was going to be like all the terabytes my computer could give.
Oh yeah, what Laura said in the chat, exaggerating some of the DEMs for in flat landscapes. I mean, yeah, we have a max elevation of like 5 feet in southern Louisiana. So it's very similar to some of that area. That is a great thing to do if you know what you're looking for. Sarah.
Well, it seems like we have some veterans on this call and we have
Great.
newbies on the call. Are you saying wait?
No, I said that's great.
Oh, so are there people new like me that have some, ask smart people stupid questions theme of what they want to know? Or is it just me? Yeah, I'm curious, Meg, where your LiDAR data comes from looking at John's comment, because you must be probably in close proximity with those who house your LiDAR data.
Yeah, we house our LiDAR data.
Yeah.
It's in-house. So the Department of Natural Resources for South Carolina houses LiDAR data for the state. So I send a text message and I get data.
That's awesome.
It's easy. It's all freely available on our website too. I can put a link in if anybody needs South Carolina.
You know, Sarah, we should take all these comments and links and stuff and put them all into a document, because this is great resource
I can,
sharing.
we have Nahar folder that has a lot of ongoing little subcommittee and topics, so we could make this a special topic.
Yeah, I saved the chat so we can archive it and do that.
This is Elizabeth. I just posted the link for Virginia's LiDAR if anybody is interested in that.
It's awesome. Well, great. Sarah, it's not wanting to download. My Wi-Fi is being really bad.
Oh,
That's okay. We're coming up on the hour though.
Georgia has a clearinghouse page, and I'm going to you have to have an account, but it's like, a free account. I'm going to drop that in here too. So it gets into all kinds of GIS data.
I know it might be short request time, but if anybody has a oh wow moment they want to share when they use LiDAR, or otherwise I'm just going to pick on Lindsay. Oh, she might be reaching for the mute button right now.
I wasn't, but I'm ready for you.
What's an oh wow moment you've had with LiDAR?
I think just its existence is so cool. I mean, you have a plane shooting lasers out of a computer and then it's bouncing back up. It's incredible. In Tennessee, right down the road from us, there's you can actually see where a manganese mine was. There's a cemetery on a park that I use all the time. Nobody knew it was there. We had a community member come out and I said, oh, cool. So in Tennessee, we have a really good 3DEP program. So it's like LiDAR. It's just using digital elevation models and triangulated networks within that. And yeah, so we can get really, really good information very, very fast. And what we were able to see is not only where the manganese mining was, where the cemetery is, where the probable locations of the structures where the people were living are, but you can also see the tram lines going up the mountain and back down. So I think that the coolest thing about LiDAR is first its existence and how it's there, but then also just how much information is there. And I'm really excited about AI and machine learning modeling through that. We have a long ways to go as far as pattern recognition is there, and really the human elements of checking out those patterns of where these structures might be or cemeteries. But I think that once we get into some of the suitability modeling and pattern recognition within machine learning frameworks, there's going to be a huge acceleration of research. So I'm really excited about that.
Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you, Jennifer Melcher. I have bookmarked the Florida page now. Anyone want to bring it home for why our group concerned with climate heritage why LiDAR data can be so important?
Because you can see how it's changed over time by just looking at the maps. And just looking at it, I mean, because a lot of them, like years, like Steve showed, you just take a look at the data and look at how much it's changed year to year to year to year, how much is eroding away. You don't have to even step out of the office, but you can obviously do field stuff. We all want to, but just looking at LiDAR data, you can really see how much it changed, even non-coastal. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Trying to get beyond shorelines too.
And one thing that has been emphasized by a lot of people is that LiDAR data reveals a tremendous amount of cultural resources that we didn't even know existed prior to looking at it. There have been automated programs to recognize circles, squares, features like that. Shell rings, for example, there's a number of papers, Davis et al., that look at LiDAR data and have identified 5-10 times as many sites as we thought were actually out there. The same with tar kilns. Grant Snitker, I believe is his name, has looked at the Francis Marion and the Kisatchie National Forest. In fact, I saw, Steve, that he's giving a paper at the LAS meetings on features using LiDAR on the National Forest. So it's opening up a whole new world of, oh, that's what's on the ground. We didn't really know it was there. Over.
Laura, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, can I share my screen? I'm going to show you a
Yeah.
GIS map. If I can I do that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Is that working? Do you see a
Yeah.
GIS map? All right, sweet. So this is Cockspur Island, and Fort Pulaski is here in the middle. And one of the things that, so this is GIS data over just like some basic background imagery. And one of our big kind of climate change issues is obviously sea level rise. And if you, as I zoom in here, you can see this sort of weird shaped thing. This is our dike that keeps the waters at bay. And then all of these in here are all the ditches that in theory drain the island. These are older, or excuse me, younger mosquito ditches out here. But these can be incredibly hard to like literally find on the ground. And so it's in theory we've had a little bit of this work done, and Lord knows where we'll find the funding to do the rest of it. But it's basically to use that existing 1829 ditch and dike system to rehabilitate it and make it work for sea level rise and make it both historically accurate and help us drain the island and keep the fort stable and keep the sea level rise at bay. And so looking at the LiDAR data gives us a lot of information about you know, where these are and how they drain, and you can just sort of see all this information that you don't necessarily even like, you'd have to get there and bushwhack because some of these areas are just like so dense and overgrown. And then the other cool thing is that on the western end of the island, as you go out here, there was a naval section base out here. And you can see some of the old, so all these really hot white spots are, so let's see, yeah, are old naval bunkers that, again, you have to like completely bushwhack to actually find them, but you can locate them out here. This isn't the greatest, but you can also see some of the old roads that are out here, and just how like the naval station, although there's very little like artifact wise because these buildings were built on piers and they just like wiped them from them, literally just wiped them. But you can still see some of that landscape level stuff on the LiDAR. But it's kind of cool because the World War II station was out here looking for U-boats. And Savannah just got designated recently a World War II heritage city, so it's kind of it's a direction we'd love to go with interpretation. But this is also more of our non-public end, and we don't actually own like this tip of the island, and so there's kind of, to me, there's like endless possibilities. I love LiDAR, so but I will stop sharing and let somebody else talk.
And Laura, have you been able to find any of the Union batteries that shelled Fort Pulaski during the siege and reduction in about 1862, because a lot of them were unknown, but with LiDAR, you might be able to pick them up. Over.
Yeah, that's a thought. I haven't specifically looked for that yet because none of them are on property that we own, but you know, it's it's certainly possible. Let me see. If we zoom out, I would have to go find which. So that would be over here on Tybee, like they kind of were stretched out roughly here. So it's possible. Like I have this data, I just didn't turn it on because it's not Cockspur Island, but that's a good thought.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason I brought it up for the rest of you is I dug a battery halleck that was just on a sand spit in the marsh. That was one of the batteries. In fact, it was the first one to open fire on the fort. And nobody knew where it was. And we went out and saw depressions and mounds. And it's like, hey, I'll bet that would show up on LiDAR nowadays. I mean, we spent days mapping it with, a total station, or not even a total station, an optical transit back in 1990. But I'm thinking there were a lot of other batteries out there that are probably, some of them are still, could be detected that way. Over.
Yeah, no, I have read your report, and of course Battery Hamilton. There was a boatload of them. Battery Hamilton is like farther up this way too, up the on the western islands farther up the river, and that can be seen fairly easily on the LiDAR. So yeah, absolutely. Hey, we're doing section 110 right now, so even though it's not technically our property, we may go rogue and look for it anyway. It's not gonna take us too long to look at the LiDAR.
Cool. Thank you.
And I just wanted to acknowledge Meg's posts and about the NSF, and definitely don't want to take that lightly. I think we could have spent the whole day talking about that, and I'm really glad this is a place we can share frustrations in a positive step. We had DEI, M&B, our committee statement, and redesigning the webpage was our first meeting that we had this year. So I did send those changes to Nicole. We're just trying to figure out the layout and what to do with the old page, but that sounds very doable. I just have to respond back to her. Maybe I'll forward it to Steve and Steve can help me too. But thank you for the contributions people have had. And when we have the page up, if anyone else wants to add or contribute or review, we'd be happy to keep improving that page. All right, John, what is that? That looks cool.
So Andrew's
Elevation
comment
change.
just kind of reminded me of one example we ran. I mean, this has been
A
10
little
plus years ago
site
at this
called
point.
Monk's Mound.
Yeah. So Cahokia, I mean, it's a World Heritage site and we're nowhere near a coastline, but change detection through LiDAR is still really applicable here. So this just happened to be two kind of closely spaced LiDAR flights that covered the site, and you can see like there's a dramatic amount of change even in just 2 years. So the mound actually has a few different perched water tables in it, and so when you get these severe rainfall events, there's big slumps and erosion that have happened like multiple times over the last few decades. So just kind of one example of the sort of thing you can see by comparing multiple years of LiDAR flights.
Are you using like a cloud compare, or what do you use to get that result?
So I mean, you do have to be careful that I think Steve mentioned this too, that depending on how the LiDAR data is processed, you have to make sure that the differences you see aren't just due to say like a difference in processing or resolution or how things are aligned. But there are some hard points around the site that we can use to basically clamp those surfaces together. And then you just do some simple raster math, time 1 minus time 2.
Perfect inland example. Yeah, Lindsay.
Yeah, John, that's amazing. Really, really incredible to be able to look at that. So is there a way that you would think that we could use like drone flights or any sort of like high-res photogrammetry to use some of this if you like upload the code for it. Because I just thinking about shorelines, you know, plenty of places, especially national parks, have had rebar put in since the 80s. So we do have some really good points where we could compare that, where we might not have maps. Our flights are kind of weird because one of the main issues we have coastally is high and low tides, and we don't always have the metadata for it. So is this simple enough from Cahokia that we could transfer these methods somewhere else?
Yeah, definitely. So that's one thing we've been looking at. So we've been exploring like how useful drone-based photogrammetry would be for this sort of thing. It's obviously limited by vegetation cover. If you can't see the ground surface, photogrammetry isn't going to work very well in an area. And at least where we are, resolution becomes an issue. So we've established permanent datums at a number of sites, and we've been going back twice a year in spring and fall and doing drone-based photogrammetry and then just comparing, like, can you detect a change based on, say, erosion or soil movement? At least where we are, it becomes a really challenging technical problem because the erosion we expect to see in most places is like a centimeter or less per year in, say, like a relatively flat agricultural field. Well, your relative accuracy on your drone-based photogrammetry is going to be about that same scale, 7, 8, 9 millimeters at the best. So it becomes hard to measure the sort of thing you're interested in. But like some of the examples in the chat people had about coastlines moving 12 meters a year, like, yeah, you're going to see that. So yeah, obviously it's a really cheap. You can get a decent drone that can do photogrammetry for not too expensive, and you can fly it as many times as you want. Uh, the main technical challenge is just good spatial control. It really helps to have permanent datums if you can. Otherwise, if you can use ground control targets, between flights that you can geo-reference, that'll tie your stuff together too. But once you get your elevation surface, you're just subtracting one time from another. Like that's pretty simple in GIS.
John, have you done much with thermal work? With like thermal drones?
Not personally, no. Like ISAS does quite a bit of geophys, but mostly like pedestrian. We've got a magnetometer, we've got resistivity equipment, stuff like that. I would love to get a thermal drone though. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
They are pretty slick. Yeah, a lot of them around. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say that thermal sometimes isn't. I did some of it at Mountville, and it's just not really like the most useful unless you like really understand like plant photosynthesis down here because of like how thick the vegetation cover can get. So it's not actually ever measuring the ground surface. It ends up measuring like the plants going through photosynthesis, which is weird. Which is weird, but like in the areas where you have better kind of exposed ground surface, you can see some um, interesting foundational features. But I saw some cool studies out in like the Southwest where they were able to find a lot of like rings and stuff. But down here, it ends up just being a big photosynthesis study sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of in the same boat where something like multispectral imaging would probably be a lot more useful for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an example in Southwest Virginia that's coming out of a cemetery. There's a student in the geoscience department here at ETSU who's having some really good luck using thermal and multispectral, Marcy. But the big difference is flying it at night, so during the summer. So the concept is that anything during the day would be absorbing heat from the sun, and then you can look at the differential there rather than photosynthesis, which you can usually just get through multispectral, through like anything online, that you don't have to fly yourself. So I think that the potential might be there, but in like things like stone, brick, maybe different grasses, maybe if there's old road beds with compacted soils that would hold heat for a longer period of time. But it differs from the existing literature, I think from like the late 90s, to say to fly it at night rather than during the day. So more research coming up.
Yeah, we actually did some work on that. We presented at the SHA and SAAs this past year. We did it on a cemetery, we flew it 3 times over 3 days. First thing in the morning, midday, and then right at sunset. And the best was sunset. We did get some very first thing in the morning, and we were able to see the differences in the more recent burials. You could see almost the outlines because they had the temperature changes. So that was kind of interesting because they had the more recent um, shafts, but they had the concrete and the cement that was put in for this cemetery, but it didn't work as well for some of the older ones. Plus, it rained the day before, so that kind of threw off the data. But we've been kind of playing it a lot too for some of the ditch work around some of the villages that are in the area, and we've been seeing some pretty cool results with some of those things. We're trying to do a big study on the same site and do like every type of geophys that we can and do it like once a month and see like how the different weather conditions and everything affect those results. So that's kind of what we're trying to do up here to see what you can get for thermal. Because I mean, rocks, yeah, it picks up rocks and it picks up headstones pretty well, but yeah, once you depressions doesn't really work as well. And it's great for agricultural. Up here they do it for like corn to see how well that's doing, because you can kind of see the different ranges in the corn heights, but for our purposes not as much.
That's pretty
I
cool.
was just gonna show something from our class, my documentation class this morning at UF. Nicholas Serrano from UF talked to us, but he was recording cemeteries using a lot of the things we've talked about, but now he's got a student interested in the soundscapes and recording that at different parts in the cemetery. So when they do the recordings of the headstone and the drawings, I didn't have the heart to take him to task for doing rubbings, but next class. And the sounds, he ended up with this like visual map of the sounds that were on top of it, which was, just something I never thought of with the application to cemeteries. But we did have, was it at a Tidally United? We did have someone who was curating soundscapes of beaches in Florida, just with all the different ways that we're recording them, just trying to include other sensory ways to understand them. And with that, I shut down the room.
And Jason Schaefer, I believe, Lindsay, his dissertation looked at soundscapes and caves, and noting that rock art and sometimes was placed in places that were either very quiet or where there was flowing water, the rippling sounds. So it was an interesting additional study looking at various aspects of the environment underground. Over.
It's very cool.
Yeah, that sound, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of our descendant communities too would be very pleased to know that those kind of activities, or if we're talking about trying to use AR, VR and giving access to some of these places, that's another sense.
Jason was working closely with the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians in the area. Question.
And thanks for your note, Elizabeth, on Carol Nash's work. Well, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. What a great group, and I was really looking forward to this. I think Steve maybe even had to go, but glad that everyone could join us.